All right. If you're into true crime, and I mean really chilling mysteries, well, this deep dive is going to be right up your alley. We're going deep into a place. Honestly, it sounds like something out of a horror movie. Fox Hollow Farm.
Yeah, Fox Hollow.
I've got this seemingly ordinary farm, right,
Yeah.
in Westfield, Indiana, owned by this, well, seemingly average businessman, Herb Baumeister. But, and here's the thing, there's a dark, dark secret hiding beneath the surface.
Oh, yeah.
A secret, and this is crazy, that turned the farm into a full-blown crime scene.
What gets me is how, a totally normal facade, right,
Right.
can hide something truly, truly horrific. And Fox Hollow Farm, oh man, that's a perfect example. Chilling, that duality.
So rewind back to 1994. Baumeister's son, he's out in the backyard, makes a disturbing discovery. A human skull.
Ah.
And Baumeister, get this, just brushes it off.
Oh.
Yeah, says it was just like some old anatomical model from his college days.
Oh, come on. That's where we start to see, those cracks in that perfect facade,
Well-
dismissing a human skull, just like that. It hints at Baumeister's manipulative nature, like he's already trying to control the narrative, even at home. But, and this is the thing, this was just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
In 1996, Baumeister's away, authorities get a warrant, they search the property, and that's when the real horror, the true horror of Fox Hollow Farm, it's revealed.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What exactly did they find?
Thousands, literally thousands of bone fragments scattered all over the farm.
Oh my God.
It wasn't just like one or two bodies, no. This was a scene of just unimaginable carnage. I mean, imagine being one of those investigators,
Right.
just confronting that level of horror.
It's mind-blowing. And to think all this was happening right there, under everyone's noses. So how many victims are we talking about here?
Okay, so authorities, they managed to piece together the remains of at least 11 individuals.
11.
But some estimates, and this is the thing, suggest the victim count could be as high as 25. And this is the really heartbreaking part. Many of them, they may never be identified.
This wasn't like a random thing, right? Baumeister, he had a specific type of victim, didn't he?
Tragically, yes. Baumeister targeted primarily gay men from the Indianapolis area. It's a chilling reminder of the vulnerability, the real vulnerability that this community faced, especially back then. You have to consider, right, the societal factors at play, the homophobia. I mean, that might have allowed these crimes to go unnoticed for so long.
God, that's really disturbing. So it's not just about Baumeister himself, it's about the context, right, in which these crimes could even happen. Are there other cases similar to this where a certain group, a marginalized group, was targeted like this?
Yeah, unfortunately, history's full of examples, sadly, of serial killers who preyed on marginalized groups, people who are often, overlooked or dismissed by society. And understanding that social context, that's crucial if we want to prevent these tragedies from happening again.
So what happened to Baumeister in the end? Was he ever brought to justice?
He wasn't. See, as the investigation got more intense, Baumeister, he fled to Canada. And before authorities could catch up, he took his own life.
Wow.
Yeah, leaving behind a trail of just devastation and so many unanswered questions.
So he basically escaped any accountability, which, that must be so frustrating for the families of the victims. They never got their day in court, right? Never got to confront him.
Exactly. No trial, no confrontation, the mystery still surrounding, the full extent of his crimes. It all just compounds the pain. Makes closure, real closure, that much more difficult. But, and this is important, even though Baumeister himself is gone, the story, it doesn't end there.
They're still working to identify the victims, even after all these years.
Yeah, they are. And this is where science, I think, offers a glimmer of hope. Advances in DNA technology, right? That's made it possible to actually identify some of the victims decades after they disappeared.
That's incredible.
It is.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so in 2024, they identified the remains of Manuel Resendez. He vanished in 1996, just through DNA testing. Wow. And then, just a few months later, May 2024, they were able to identify Jeffrey A. Jones. He'd been missing since '93. And these breakthroughs, they offer some closure, some measure of closure for the families.
Of course.
But there are still so many others out there waiting to be identified.
So the investigation is still ongoing then. Are authorities still looking for information?
Absolutely. They're still asking for DNA samples from families of missing persons, hoping to match them to the unidentified remains from Fox Hollow Farm. That pursuit of justice, and identification for all of the victims, it's still going on.
It's a story that just won't let go. And it's captured, it's captured the public's attention. There's even a docuseries about it now, right?
Yeah, the Fox Hollow Murders. Playground of a Serial Killer. Yeah, premiered on Hulu just last month. It goes really deep into the case, the discoveries, the efforts to identify everyone. And I think it just shows our fascination that we have with true crime, particularly cases like this, where it's seemingly normal people committing these horrific acts.
It's the contrast, isn't it? This idyllic setting, Foxhole Farm, versus, the reality of what happened there. It's hard to reconcile those two things.
It is. It's unsettling. And I think that's part of why people are drawn to these stories, right? We want to understand how anyone could commit such awful acts, especially in a place that seems so normal, so safe.
But this isn't just a story. These are real people, real lives that were lost, real families still searching for answers.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why it's so important to remember the victims, to honor their memories, and to never, ever stop looking for the truth.
Well said. So far, we've talked about the initial discoveries at Fox Hollow Farm and, God, just the sheer scale of it all. We've learned about the victims and the ongoing efforts to identify them. But now let's go deeper, Let's dive into the man behind it all, Herb Baumeister. What can we learn from his past, from his psychology, that might help us understand how he became a monster?
It's chilling, to think about the psychology, the factors at play here. What could possibly drive a seemingly ordinary businessman, right, to commit such heinous acts? It's a question that it just haunts you, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, how do you go from, running this successful chain of thrift stores to this? There's this disconnect,
Right, and that's where this whole concept of, like, a double life, it becomes crucial to understanding cases like this. Baumeister was, like, to everyone, a totally respectable member of the community. But underneath, right, under that carefully constructed facade, there was this darkness just festering.
So like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. But like way, way darker. Were there any red flags in Baumeister's early life? Anything that hinted at this potential for violence?
Oh, there were signs, even in his youth. Reports suggest, he was displaying erratic behavior, having trouble forming, like, stable relationships. He struggled with alcohol, and people described him as, like, withdrawn, unpredictable.
So those issues, they were already there, but maybe they just got worse over time. Maybe success, instead of, smoothing those rough edges out, maybe it actually made things worse.
Oh, that's an interesting angle. And yeah, it's possible. As he gained wealth and status, right, his darker impulses, they might have grown alongside that success. Like, he might have felt this sense of power, of invincibility, and that fueled, his predatory behavior.
It's a scary thought that achieving that American dream could actually have, like, a negative impact on someone with, pre-existing vulnerabilities like Baumeister.
Right. It reminds us that success, material success, doesn't equal mental well-being. In Baumeister's case, it seems like it just made his psychological issues, even worse. But one question that always comes up in these cases is, how did he get away with it for so long? Weren't people suspicious?
Yeah, exactly. You'd think someone would have noticed something was off. Was he just, like, that good at hiding it all?
Baumeister, he was a master manipulator. He was so good at compartmentalizing his life, keeping those dark secrets hidden, from his family, friends, business associates.
He probably also chose his victims carefully,
Right.
People who maybe wouldn't be missed as quickly.
Sadly, yes. Targeting gay men during a time when homophobia was so prevalent, it's awful. He exploited their vulnerability. They might have been less likely to, report any interactions, fearing judgment, discrimination.
God, that's heartbreaking.
Great.
Like, society's prejudices actually created the conditions that allowed this to happen.
It's a stark reminder, we need to create a society where everyone feels safe, supported, regardless of, their sexual orientation or anything else that makes them vulnerable. But let's shift gears for a second. We've talked about his background, right? His manipulative nature, the victims. But what was his actual MO? How did he lure these men to Fox Hollow Farm?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. How did he get them to a place where he could, do these horrible things?
From what we know, it seems like Baumeister used a combination of things, charm, deception, and sometimes force. He'd go to, like, gay bars and clubs in Indianapolis, presenting himself as, like, this friendly, approachable guy.
So he built trust, made them feel comfortable, and then what?
He'd invite them back to Fox Hollow Farm, often under the guise of, like, a social thing or a romantic encounter. And once they were isolated, out there at the farm, that's when he'd reveal his true intentions.
It's horrifying to imagine being in that situation, realizing you're trapped with someone who wants to hurt you.
It's a nightmare scenario. And Fox Hollow Farm itself, with the sprawling grounds, the seclusion, it was the perfect hunting ground for him. It gave him control, kept the victims hidden.
And he could dispose of the bodies right there on the property. God, it's chilling, the level of premeditation.
It's just cold, calculated, a complete disregard for human life. Baumeister went to great lengths to hide it all, maintain that normal facade. But even the most meticulous killers, they make mistakes.
That's true. There had to be some clues, right? Some slip-ups. Weren't there any warning signs that people missed?
Oh, absolutely. There were warning signs, missed opportunities, close calls even. Like Baumeister's wife, Julie, she'd repeatedly voiced concerns about his behavior. She even reported finding strange things on their property.
Right, I remember reading about that. Wasn't there also something with, like, a mannequin?
Yes. In 1995, a man escaped from Fox Hollow Farm. He went straight to the police, said Baumeister tried to strangle him with a pool hose, described being tied up, fearing for his life, and tragically, his story, it was dismissed as just a lover's quarrel.
That's infuriating. If they'd taken him seriously, maybe some of the later victims,
Yeah.
they could have been saved.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of how systemic biases, how societal attitudes can just get in the way of justice, and in this case, potentially cost lives. It also makes you wonder, how thoroughly did they investigate missing persons cases within the gay community back then?
That's a really good point. Were those cases given the same attention, the same resources as other missing persons cases?
It's a valid question. There's a long, troubled history of law enforcement not taking crimes against marginalized communities seriously enough.
It's possible, right?
Yeah.
That some of Baumeister's victims weren't actively searched for, which allowed him to just keep going, keep killing.
It just shows that we need to demand justice for all victims, no matter their background, their lifestyle. Absolutely. Every life is precious. Every victim deserves justice. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to just reflect on what we've learned about Baumeister's psychology, his MO, and the societal context that allowed his crimes to, go on for so long.
You've given us a lot to think about, but we're not done yet. We've explored the crimes, the victims, and that twisted mind of Herb Baumeister. But what happened after all of this came to light? What happened to Fox Hollow Farm, and how did these crimes impact the community? Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into the truly chilling story of Fox Hollow Farm. We've talked about the crimes, the victims, that incredibly twisted mind of Herb Baumeister. Now let's look at what happened after all of this came to light. What became of that infamous property?
Well, after Baumeister's suicide, Fox Hollow Farm, it became this site of intense investigation, a really grim symbol of the whole tragedy. Eventually, it was sold. And the new owners, they tried to, I guess, reclaim the land, even renaming it, to try and distance it from that dark past.
Makes you wonder, though. Can you ever truly, erase history? Especially a history as gruesome as this. Did the new owners, did they, try to cleanse the property in some way?
They did. They tore down the house where Baumeister lived, hoping to, symbolically break with the past. But the land itself, that ground, right where all those bone fragments were found, that's not something you can just erase.
Like a scar on the landscape.
Yeah.
A constant reminder of what happened there. How did the community react to all of this? I can't imagine the weight of this horrific discovery on the town of Westfield.
Yeah, the impact was profound, lasting. Just imagine, right, living in a town where something like this happened, where this seemingly ordinary neighbor turned out to be, well, a monster. There was shock, grief, betrayal, really shook the community to its core.
And for the victims' families, the pain, it must have been, God, just magnified by the fact that Baumeister, he never faced justice, never had to answer for what he did. They never got that chance to confront him, to hold him accountable.
Absolutely. That lack of closure, the unanswered questions, the inability to confront him, it all adds to the trauma, makes healing so much harder. But even with all this darkness, there have been some positive developments.
You're talking about those recent DNA identifications, right? Those must have brought some comfort, at least, to the families of Manuel Resendez and Jeffrey Jones.
Yeah, for sure. Every time a name is put to a set of remains, it's a victory. For those who have been fighting just tirelessly for answers, it brings a measure of closure, to a family that's grieving, and it helps restore dignity to those who were lost.
It's amazing, really, the dedication of the scientists, the investigators who are still working on this case. Even after all these years, Their efforts give hope that maybe, one day, all the victims will be identified.
That's important to remember, that part of the story, the ongoing pursuit of justice. It's a reminder that we can't let time, diminish our resolve to find those answers, to hold perpetrators accountable no matter how long it takes.
We've had a lot to think about with this case. The nature of evil, right? The importance of being vigilant, the power of resilience.
And maybe it also challenges us to look at our own communities, to ask ourselves, how can we be more inclusive, more supportive, more vigilant in protecting the vulnerable?
That's a powerful thought to leave with our listeners. We've explored the horrors, the absolute horrors of Fox Hollow Farm.
Yeah.
But what lessons can we take away? How can we be more vigilant in our own communities? How can we advocate for those who are vulnerable? These are questions worth thinking about as we reflect on this dark chapter in American history.
It's a reminder that evil can hide in unexpected places and that we have to be vigilant, always protecting those who are most vulnerable. By remembering the victims, by learning from their stories, we can work toward a world where tragedies like this, they're less likely to happen.
Well said. Fox Hollow Farm is, I think, both a warning and a testament to the strength of the human spirit. We can never forget the victims. May their stories inspire us to create a more just, more compassionate world. And with that, we're concluding our deep dive into this truly haunting case.
Yeah.
We hope this exploration has helped you understand the complexities of this tragedy and left you with, a sense of reflection and resolve. Thanks for joining us.